The church basement went quiet only after Deacon Russell Hayde said the word everyone in town had been whispering for 60 years. Thief. He said it with one hand resting on the broken-hand loom, as if the cracked wood itself were evidence against the old woman standing beside it. Nora Whitcomb was 84, small enough now that her winter coat seemed to carry more weight than she did. Every Tuesday, she came down those basement stairs, dusted that useless loom, checked the same loose beam, and left without explaining why. To the church committee, it was junk. To Russell, it was a stain on the room they were trying to sell so they could repair the leaking roof. To Nora's grandson, it was worse than junk. It was the thing keeping an old shame alive, just when he needed a clean name for a job at the Mertens Textile Foundation. Because in Mill Hollow, everyone knew the story. Back in the winter of 1962, relief cloth had vanished before the poorest children in town received their coats, and the last person seen near the locked storage room was Nora Whitcomb, then a young seamstress with thread on her sleeves and no money in her purse. So when Nora asked for 1 hour to take the loom apart by hand, people laughed. But hidden inside that broken frame was not money, not a confession, and not the proof anyone expected. It was something stitched so carefully that only the woman accused of stealing cloth could read it. And when she finally did, the town would have to ask who really sold the children's winter coats. If stories about forgotten people, old accusations, and ordinary things that carry the truth still mean something to you, consider subscribing. Because this was not only a story about an old woman and a broken loom, it was about what happens when a town remembers the wrong lie for far too long. The rain had started before sunrise, tapping against the narrow basement windows of First Mercy Church in Mill Hollow, Pennsylvania. Upstairs, 3 plastic buckets caught water from the leaking roof, each drip falling with a hollow sound that carried down the stairwell. By 10 in the morning, the basement was full. Folding chairs were stacked against one wall. Old hymnals sat in cardboard boxes. Shelves of donated winter coats waited to be sorted. Against the far wall, under a faded quilt Nora Whitcomb had brought from home, sat the broken-hand loom. One leg had split near the floor, the upper beam sagged. Dust sat in the grooves like gray flour. To most of the committee, it was only dead wood taking up space. Deacon Russell Hayde stood beside it with a clipboard and a red sticker pressed to the frame. Removal today. The buyer's representative comes at 4, Russell said. Everything not included in the sale has to be out before then. No one argued. Selling the basement would pay the contractor and keep First Mercy from borrowing money it did not have. Then Nora stepped forward. She was 84, gray hair pinned under a blue scarf, black shoes polished despite the worn soles. In one hand, she held an old sewing bag. In the other, the brass key to the storage room. "I'll take the loom apart myself," she said. Russell looked over his glasses. "Nora, we've discussed this." "No," she said quietly. "You discussed it." I listened. Caleb Whitcomb, her grandson, stood near the stairs, his face tight with embarrassment. "Grandma," he said, "please." Nora kept her eyes on the loom. Russell tapped the clipboard. "This basement is being sold as cleared space. The loom has no function, no assessed value, and given its association with church history, some of us believe it should be removed quietly." "Church history," Nora repeated. Russell's mouth tightened. "You know what I mean." Everyone did. In Mill Hollow, the story had been repeated until it no longer sounded like rumor. In the winter of 1962, relief cloth arrived from Harrisburg, enough wool and lining to make coats for children whose families could not afford them. Women from the church were supposed to sew those coats in this basement, but the cloth disappeared. The coats were never made. And Nora Whitcomb, 21 years old then, had been the last seamstress seen near the locked storage room. Russell turned slightly, as if the committee were a jury. "My father was on the church board that winter. He spent his life trying to repair the damage done to this congregation's name." Nora's fingers tightened around the sewing bag. Caleb stepped forward. "Deacon Hayde, maybe we don't need to—" "No," Russell said. "Maybe we do. Your grandmother has touched that thing every week as if it were sacred. Every winter, certain families are expected to pretend they don't remember what happened." Then he said the word. Not loud. Worse. "Thief." The basement froze. Nora did not flinch. She had heard that word in grocery aisles, at funerals, behind screen doors. After 60 years, it no longer struck like a stone. It settled like dust. Caleb's face reddened. Don't call her that. Russell looked at him almost gently. Don't ruin your future defending what you don't understand. That landed harder than the insult. Caleb had received a job offer from the Mertens Textile Foundation 2 days earlier. Archive assistant. Health benefits. Steady hours. A clean way out of overdue rent and the old Whitcomb shame. Nora opened her sewing bag. Inside were a flat screwdriver, a small awl, pliers wrapped in flannel, and folded beeswax paper. Maybelle, the custodian, whispered, Nora, what are you doing? What I should have done before they locked the story around me, Nora said. Russell gave a humorless laugh. You are not dismantling church property. It was donated by Elsie Marrow, Nora said. Not by the church board. Elsie has been dead 31 years. Yes, Nora said. That is why I'm asking for 1 hour, not permission from her. Caleb rubbed both hands over his face. Grandma, if this gets around, it already got around, Nora said, looking at him at last. 60 years ago, Russell checked his watch. The removal crew arrives at 5. If it's still here, it goes out in one piece. No saws, Nora said. He stared. Why? Nora rested her palm on the loose upper beam, the same beam she had checked every Tuesday, while everyone thought she was dusting regret. Some threads should not be cut. Russell lowered his clipboard. Fine. 1 hour. But at 5 o'clock, Mrs. Whitcomb, your little shrine goes to the dump. Nora picked up the screwdriver. Her hand trembled, but not enough to stop. In the winter of 1962, Mill Hollow did not look like a place that could afford shame. It was a narrow Pennsylvania town built around Merton's Mill and the whistle that called people to work before daylight. Men walked with lunch pails. Women pulled wool coats tight. Children hurried toward school with their hands tucked inside their sleeves. Nora Whitcomb was 21 then, though most people still called her girl. She lived with her parents in a rented house behind the cemetery, where wind pushed snow under the back door. Her father repaired shoes in a shed with one iron stove. Her mother took in washing when her hands were not swollen. Money appeared in their house for a moment, then vanished. But Nora could sew. She had learned from her mother, from First Mercy Church, and then from the mill itself. At Merton's, she worked near the end of line 2, trimming loose threads from coat lining and checking seams before the pieces went to shipping. She was quick, quiet, and careful. On Saturdays, Nora went to the church basement. Back then, it smelled of starch, coal, smoke, coffee, and damp wool thawing near the furnace. Women sat shoulder to shoulder, passing needles and measuring sleeves. Against the wall stood the hand loom, older even then, its wood dark from years of hands. Elsie Marrow, a schoolteacher with silver-rimmed glasses, used it to teach girls how cloth remembered tension. Thread tells on the hand that pulls it, Elsie told Nora once. Nora smiled because she thought Elsie meant sewing. Only years later would she understand that Elsie meant people too. That December, the cold came early and stayed. Pipes burst under kitchen floors. Coal bills rose. At Mill Hollow School, children lined their shoes with newspaper. Elsie began writing names in a brown notebook, not for grades, but for coats. By the second week of December, she had 43 names. The relief cloth arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in a state truck from Harrisburg. Bolts of wool, dark lining, canvas labels, thread, buttons, and enough heavy fabric to make winter coats before Christmas if the women worked quickly. The church board opened the basement for sewing. Merton's Mill loaned cutting tables. Arthur Mertens himself stood in the doorway in his clean overcoat and promised that Mill Hollow would take care of its own. People applauded him. Nora remembered that most clearly. Not his words, the applause. For 3 nights, Nora worked after her shift. She cut sleeve linings beside Elsie, marked sizes in pencil, and sorted buttons into chipped saucers. The basement filled with scissors opening and closing, thread snapping between teeth, and women murmuring names of children they knew. Then, on the 4th night, Nora noticed the numbers. Every bolt of cloth had a colored thread tied through its end label. Blue for one shipment, brown for another, gray for lining, red for county priority. At the mill, those colors told a worker where cloth came from, where it was going, and who had signed it out. Nora knew relief cloth should not carry a private contractor mark, but one bolt did. A thin red-brown twist near the label. Nora pointed it out to Elsie after the others left. Elsie took off her glasses and looked toward the stairs as if footsteps might appear there. "Are you sure?" she asked. Nora nodded. "That color combination isn't for church work. It's for outside lining contracts." Elsie's face changed. Not fear exactly. Recognition. The next afternoon, Elsie asked Nora to check the storage room after her mill shift. She wanted the labels copied before the board started cutting everything. Nora still had a spare key because she had been helping organize the cloth. That was how traps looked before they closed. Nora entered the storage room just after dusk. The church upstairs was empty. Snow scraped against the narrow windows. She lit the pull-chain bulb and saw the relief cloth stacked on the left wall, or most of it. 3 bolts were gone. In their place sat a delivery receipt folded under a button box. Nora opened it and saw her own name written in the line for release assistant, though she had signed no such paper. Her mouth went dry. She understood enough to be frightened, but not enough to know who had done it. Then she heard a truck outside. Through the small basement window, she saw the rear doors of a Merton's vehicle closing near the alley. 2 men loaded wrapped bolts into the back. One wore a mill cap pulled low. The other had a dark coat with a churchboard pin near the lapel. Nora did not run upstairs. She did not scream. She did the thing a seamstress did when she could not stop a cloth from leaving. She kept a sample. From the end of one suspicious bolt, she cut a strip no wider than 2 fingers. She pulled loose the colored thread from its label. She tucked both into her coat lining, locked the storage room, and went looking for Elsie. By morning, the story had already chosen her. The board said cloth was missing. Arthur Merton said records showed Nora had signed access. Russell Hade's father said the church had been betrayed by one of its own helpers. Someone claimed they had seen Nora leaving with fabric under her coat. That part was true. Not enough fabric for a coat, not enough to sell, not enough to keep anyone warm, but enough to make a lie believable. Nora waited for Elsie to speak. Elsie came to the meeting pale, one hand pressed around her brown notebook. She looked at Nora once from across the room, and Nora saw terror behind her glasses. Then the school superintendent called Elsie into the hall. When she returned, she said nothing. Nora was dismissed from Merton's mill before Christmas. Children still came to school without new coats. Her father stopped taking shoes from families who would not meet his eye. Her mother began walking to the market 2 streets farther away, and the loom remained in the basement. Elsie came to Nora once in late February. She brought no apology. Only a folded scrap of cloth and a sentence Nora would carry longer than anger. "Not yet," Elsie whispered. "If we speak before the names are safe, they will erase the children too." Nora hated her for that. Then she believed her. So she stayed silent. Not because silence was dignity, and not because the accusation did not hurt. She stayed silent because somewhere in Mill Hollow, 43 children had gone cold while grown men balanced reputation against truth. And Nora had only 1 strip of cloth, 1 broken loom, and 1 promise she did not yet know how to keep. Back in the basement of First Mercy Church, the broken loom looked smaller once Nora stood beside it with tools in her hands. Not because it had changed, because the room had changed. A few minutes earlier, it had been an old piece of furniture waiting for removal. Now every eye in the basement seemed fixed on it, as if cracked wood could suddenly answer for 60 years of silence. Russell Hade folded his arms near the stairs. Caleb stood halfway between his grandmother and the door, caught in the posture of a man who wanted to leave but could not make himself abandon her. Maybelle had stopped pretending to sort hymnals. 2 church elders whispered near the winter coat shelves, their voices low enough to sound respectful and sharp enough to wound. Nora did not ask them to move. She pulled the quilt fully away from the loom and folded it over the back of a chair. The wood underneath was darker than the basement light had made it seem. The front rail was worn smooth in 2 places where hands had rested again and again. The left treadle hung at an angle. One side brace had been repaired with a mismatched piece of maple, lighter than the original walnut. The upper beam sagged forward like an old shoulder. Caleb looked at it and saw a hazard. Russell saw church property that had overstayed its welcome. May saw another thing in a basement full of things no one had time to save. But Nora saw hands, Elsie Marrow's hands, correcting a girl's grip on the shuttle. Her mother's hands, tying knots so small they seemed impossible. Mill women's hands, red at the knuckles from winter wash water, working late because a child they knew needed sleeves before Sunday. The loom had never been valuable in the way men like Russell measured value. It had not made fine cloth. It had not been built by a famous maker. It had no brass maker's plate, no polished finish, no museum shine. Even in 1962, it had been old, stubborn, and difficult. But it had taught poor women how to mend what the world expected them to throw away. Nora set the screwdriver against the first screw on the front rail. The metal slipped once. Caleb stepped closer. "Let me do it." "No. Grandma, your hands. My hands remember this better than yours." The words were not cruel, but they stopped him. She pressed harder. The screw groaned, then turned. A small curl of old dust lifted from the wood. Nora placed the screw on the beeswax paper, not on the table, arranging it carefully as if its position mattered. Russell exhaled. "You don't need to preserve every nail." "It is not a nail. It's a screw then." "It is order," Nora said. He looked at the elders with a tired expression, inviting them to share his patience. "This is exactly what I mean. We are turning a removal job into a ritual." Nora removed the second screw, then the third. Each one went onto the paper in a line. Caleb watched despite himself. As a boy, he had seen his grandmother repair buttons, hem curtains, patch knees in jeans, so cleanly the tear looked ashamed of itself. She never hurried with cloth. He used to think that was because she was slow. Now he wondered if she had been careful because care was the only kind of testimony she had been allowed to give. The front rail loosened. May moved forward. "Do you want a box for the pieces?" "Not yet," Nora said. She lifted the rail free and set it down. Beneath it lay a strip of darker wood, hidden from view when the loom was assembled. Caleb frowned. The strip had been added later. Even he could see that. Its edge did not match the rest of the frame, and the small pegs holding it in place had been trimmed by hand. Russell noticed it too. "Was that repair documented?" he asked. Nora almost smiled. "Not everything worth keeping was documented by your father." The room tightened. Russell's face flushed, but he said nothing. Nora took the awl from her bag. She ran its point along the seam of the added strip, not prying yet, only feeling for resistance. Her fingers found a place near the right corner, where the wood gave the slightest click. Caleb heard it. "What was that?" "Old maple," Nora said. "That wasn't maple." "No," she said. "It wasn't." Russell stepped away from the stairs. "Mrs. Whitcomb, if you damage that frame before removal, the buyer can deduct from the sale." Nora looked up at him. "The buyer is purchasing a basement, not a memory. He is purchasing cleared space. Then he will have it." Her calm irritated him more than anger would have. Nora worked the awl under the peg. Her hand trembled again, this time enough that Caleb reached out without thinking. She did not slap him away. She simply shifted, blocking his hand with her shoulder. "I need you to watch," she said. "I am watching." "No," Nora said. "You are waiting for me to embarrass you." Caleb went still. That landed in the room harder than Russell's accusation, because it had not been spoken for the committee. It had been spoken for him. Nora softened her voice. "Watch the wood." He swallowed and looked down. The peg came loose. Under it, almost hidden in shadow, was a pinprick line of color. Blue. Not paint. Not stain. Thread. Caleb bent closer. "Is that?" Nora moved faster than anyone expected. She laid her palm over the seam. Russell saw the motion. "What are you hiding?" "Nothing that belongs to you. That loom is in this church. And the truth was in this church too," Nora said. "That did not make it yours." Maybelle made a small sound, almost a gasp. For the first time that morning, the elders were not whispering. The basement had gone quiet in a different way now. Not the silence after an insult. The silence before a door opens. Nora took the beeswax paper and slid it beneath the loosened peg so the thread would not snag. Caleb watched her do it, and something in his face changed. Not belief yet, not trust, but attention. Russell checked his watch again, though no one believed time was what worried him now. "You have 50 minutes, he said. Nora nodded. Then she turned back to the loom, to the mismatched repair, to the hidden line of blue thread waiting under wood that everyone else had called junk. For 60 years, the town had misunderstood the loom because it had misunderstood Nora. They thought she came to dust an old shame. But every Tuesday, she had been checking whether the seam still held. Nora had not expected the first piece of thread to appear so soon. For a moment, her palm stayed over the seam, feeling the thin ridge of it beneath her skin. Blue thread, old thread, the kind used not for decoration, but for marking cloth before it passed from one hand to another. Caleb stared at her hand. Grandma, he said, lower now. What is under there? Nora did not answer right away. She reached for the beeswax paper and folded one edge, making a small cradle beside the loosened peg. Russell's patience began to crack. You asked for 1 hour to dismantle a loom, he said, not to conduct a performance. Nora looked at him. Then stop giving me an audience. A few elders shifted uncomfortably. Someone near the coat shelves gave a nervous laugh, then swallowed it when Maybelle turned around. Nora slid the awl beneath the next peg. Her fingers were steady for 3 seconds, then shook. Age had made small work cruel. It stole pressure from the thumb, strength from the wrist, confidence from the smallest joints. She had once threaded needles in low light without squinting. Now the peg blurred unless she leaned close. Caleb saw the tremor again. This time, he did not offer to take the tool. He crouched beside her. Tell me where to hold it, he said. Nora glanced at him, surprised by the restraint. The rail, she said. Not the seam. He placed both hands where she told him. Russell watched the two of them and shook his head. You know what people are going to say, Caleb. Caleb kept his eyes on the wood. People already say it. Yes, and you are giving them new reason. That landed where Russell intended. Caleb's jaw tightened. Nora heard it. She also heard what Russell did not say aloud. Mertens. The job offer. The archive position. The clean shirt Caleb had ironed twice. The apartment application he had not told her about. The quiet hope that one respectable letter with the Mertens name at the top might make people stop lowering their voices when they heard Whitcomb. Nora pressed the awl too hard. The peg splintered. Careful, Russell snapped. Caleb looked up. It's already broken. That is not the point. No, Nora said. It rarely was. She set the damaged peg on the paper and reached for the third. This one refused to move. She worked the awl around its edge. The wood clicked, then held. Her breath shortened. The basement seemed warmer now, though the rain outside kept dragging cold across the windows. May came forward with a flashlight. Would this help? Nora nodded. The beam of light caught the seam. Beneath the lifted strip, Caleb saw not one thread, but the suggestion of several, pressed flat in darkness. Blue, brown, gray. Then the third peg broke loose all at once. A narrow folded paper slipped out from behind the repair strip and fluttered onto the concrete floor. For 1 second, no one moved. Russell bent first. Nora said, "Don't." He picked it up anyway. The paper was brittle, yellowed, and creased into a long rectangle. Russell unfolded it with the caution of a man who wanted the truth only if it helped him. His eyes moved across the page. Then his expression changed. "Well?" he said softly. Caleb stood. "What is it?" Russell turned the paper toward the room. It was a receipt. At the top, in faded ink, were the words, First Mercy Relief Cloth, Storage. December 14, 1960, 2. Below that were numbers, a delivery mark, and a signature line. Nora Whitcomb. A small sound passed through the elders. Not surprise. Recognition. The sound people make when a story they already believe finds another nail. Caleb's face drained. Nora closed her eyes. Russell's voice grew firmer as he read. Released for handling. 3 partial bolts. Wool blend. Lining cloth. Button packet. He lowered the receipt slowly. You wanted us to see what was inside the loom, he said. There it is. May whispered. Russell. No, May. This is exactly what this town was told. She had access. She signed for cloth. Cloth disappeared. Caleb turned to Nora. Is that your signature? Nora opened her eyes. Yes. The word struck Caleb harder than any denial could have. He took 1 step back from the loom. You said you didn't steal it. I did not. But you signed for it. Yes. And you never told me? Nora's mouth trembled, but her voice stayed quiet. There are things that sound like confession when they are only pieces. Russell gave a sharp laugh. That is convenient. One of the elders, Mrs. Pruitt, folded her arms. My brother was 7 that winter. He walked to school in a spring jacket until February. Nora looked at her. I remember Tommy. Don't say his name like you cared. Caleb flinched. That was the old wound opening again, but now it had fresh blood. Nora had known there would be a receipt. She had not known it would be found first. Russell held the paper up. I think we are done. No, Nora said. You have given this committee enough. No. Her voice did not rise, but something in it changed. Russell stepped closer. Mrs. Whitcomb, if you had any decency, you would let this be removed quietly. Nora reached for the repair strip again. Caleb caught her wrist. Grandma, he whispered, stop, please, you're making it worse. She looked down at his hand on her wrist. He released her immediately, ashamed. I know, she said. He stared at her. You know? Yes. That answer frightened him more than if she had argued. Caleb backed away toward the stairs, pulling his phone from his coat pocket. He did not leave the basement, but he turned his shoulder to the room and made a call with his voice low. Nora heard enough. Merton's Foundation, this is Lydia Voss's office. He was calling to protect the job, or to warn them, or both. Russell saw it too, and looked satisfied. Nora picked up the screwdriver again. Her hand shook worse now. The room had turned against her in a way it understood. Receipt, signature, cloth, old accusation made new. May kept the flashlight steady. Why would someone hide that receipt in the loom? May asked. Russell said, guilt. Nora fitted the screwdriver under the maple strip. No, she said. The strip groaned. A sliver cracked off and fell beside the receipt. Nora leaned close enough that Caleb, still on the phone, turned back despite himself. Under the place where the receipt had been folded, the thread continued. Not loose, not random, woven through tiny drilled holes in the back of the repair strip, pulled in a sequence no one in the basement could read. Russell frowned. Nora touched the first color. Blue, then brown, then gray, then red. The receipt is real, she said. The basement held its breath. But it is not the end of the story. For the first time that morning, no one looked at the receipt. They looked past it. At the thread. It ran through the back of the maple repair strip in a sequence too deliberate to be decoration. Blue, brown, gray, red, then blue again. Then two narrow gray loops so tight they seemed almost embedded in the wood. Whoever had placed it there had not tucked it away in panic. They had measured it, pulled it through tiny drilled holes, and sealed it behind the strip where only someone dismantling the loom by hand would ever find it. Russell stared at the colors as if they had offended him. That could be anything, he said. Nora did not look up. No, it could be mending thread. No, a child could have done that. Nora finally turned toward him. A child would have made it prettier. Maybelle, still holding the flashlight, leaned closer. Then what is it? Nora touched the blue thread with the tip of her fingernail. Receiving mark, then brown. Mill batch, then gray. Lining, then red. Her voice lowered. Priority relief. Russell's eyes narrowed. You expect us to believe thread is a record? At Merton's, Nora said, thread was often a better record than paper. That line unsettled the room. Because paper could be signed by men who never touched cloth. Paper could be misplaced, corrected, replaced, burned. But thread traveled with the bolt. It passed through loading rooms, cutting tables, shipping carts, and sewing hands. A worker who knew the system could tell where fabric came from by the color tied through the label. Nora had known that when she was 21. She knew it now. Caleb ended his phone call near the stairs without saying goodbye. His face was pale, and he kept the phone in his hand as if it might ring again with judgment. Lydia Voss's assistant said not to make any public accusations involving Merton's records, he said. Russell turned sharply. You called them? Caleb swallowed. I asked if an old receipt could affect my offer. And they said they would review it. The words fell into the basement like another leak from the roof. Nora closed her eyes for one breath. Not because she was surprised, because she had known the cost would not wait until the truth was complete. Then May said, there might be inventory cards. Everyone turned to her. She pointed toward the metal filing cabinet beside the furnace room. Old church storage records. Most of them are useless, but I kept the boxes because nobody told me I could throw them out. Russell frowned. May, this is not the time to dig through. It is exactly the time, Nora said. May set the flashlight on a chair, crossed the room, and opened the bottom drawer of the cabinet. It stuck halfway. She pulled harder. The drawer screamed on its track, then gave. Inside were hanging folders, brittle envelopes, and a shoebox marked Basement Misc. Dust rose when she opened it. Russell checked his watch again, but no one followed his eyes this time. May sorted quickly, murmuring dates. 1,970, 8 bake sale, furnace repair, choir robes, pantry receipts. Here, 1,000, 962. She lifted a stack of index cards tied with string. Russell reached for them. May held them back. "I can read," she said. That earned the smallest sound from Caleb. Not a laugh exactly, something close to relief, though it disappeared quickly. May untied the string and found a card labeled Relief Cloth Storage Deck, 1962. The ink had faded, but the lines were still clear. Delivery number, bolt count, volunteer access, cutting schedule, and along the left margin, beside 3 bolt numbers, were tiny colored marks. Blue, brown, gray, red. May's hand went still. Caleb came closer. "Those match," Russell said. "Colored pencil. That proves nothing." Nora reached into her sewing bag and removed a small folded square of cream cloth. It had been wrapped in wax paper, so long the paper had gone soft at the creases. Caleb stared at it. "You kept that?" Nora nodded. "Not enough to make a sleeve. Enough to remember what men hoped women would forget." She unfolded it on the table. The cloth was dark wool, faded at the edges. Along one side, where a label had once been stitched, 4 strands clung to the seam. Blue, brown, gray, red. The same order. May placed the inventory card beside it. For the first time, the evidence did not point at Nora. It pointed through her. Russell's expression tightened. "Even if those colors match, the receipt still has your signature." "Yes," Nora said. "You signed out cloth. I signed to handle partial bolts for sizing and cutting. That is not what it says. That is not all it says." Nora slid the receipt closer and tapped a small mark beside the delivery number. It was so faint most of them had missed it. H3, written in a different hand from her signature. "At Merton's," she said. H meant holding. 3 meant partial bolt. Cloth not released for finished use. Caleb looked at the inventory card. "There's H3 here too." Nora nodded. May whispered, "So the receipt didn't mean she took it." "It meant I was allowed to measure it," Nora said, "not remove it from relief inventory." Mrs. Pruitt, the elder whose brother had walked to school in a spring jacket, stared at the card. Her face had lost some of its anger, but none of its pain. "Then where did the coats go?" she asked. Nora did not answer fast, because that was the question that still carried children inside it. She looked down at the cloth strip, at the card, at the thread running through the loom. The basement seemed to draw closer around her. The coats on the shelves behind them were new donations, plastic buttons and synthetic lining, waiting for families who would never know how long one winter could last in a town's bones. "I saw a truck," Nora said. "That night." Russell stiffened. "Be careful." Nora did not look at him. "A Merton's truck," she continued. "Backed to the alley after dark. I saw wrapped bolts being loaded into it. One man wore a mill cap, one wore a churchboard pin." Russell's face changed so quickly, Caleb noticed. Not guilt. Fear of inheritance. "You never said that," Russell said. "I said enough to the wrong people," Nora replied. "Then I learned what wrong people do with enough." May picked up the flashlight again and aimed it at the underside of the maple strip. The thread did not end at the red loop. It disappeared deeper, toward the center of the upper beam, where another repair patch had been sealed with 2 tiny nails. Caleb reached for the screwdriver, then stopped and looked at Nora for permission. She gave a small nod. This time, when he knelt beside her, the room did not laugh. Even Russell said nothing. Caleb placed the screwdriver under Nora's guidance and began loosening the next nail. His hands were younger, stronger, but slower now, because he understood that force could ruin what patience had protected. The nail lifted. A second line of thread appeared inside the beam. Blue, brown, gray, red, then black. Nora drew in a breath. May saw it. "What does black mean?" Nora's eyes stayed on the thread. "Diverted shipment," she said. The basement went silent again. Not because Nora had been proven innocent. Not yet, but because for the first time in 60 years, the old story had a crack wide enough for truth to breathe through. Caleb did not know the Mertens archive system well enough to be dangerous. Not yet, but he knew how to search a public catalog. He knew how to read a file label. And he knew, with the dull sickness of someone watching his own future loosen in real time, that the name Mertens was no longer only a job offer on letterhead. It was in the thread. He sat on the bottom stair with his phone in both hands, thumbs moving too fast at first, then slower as the signal inside the basement weakened. The old church walls were thick stone, and the rain outside had turned hard against the windows. Above them, one of the buckets caught another roof drip. Hollow, hollow, hollow. May kept the flashlight on the beam. Nora stood beside the loom with one hand resting near the black thread, as if touching it too directly might wake something that had waited long enough. Russell Hade had gone very still. "Caleb," Nora said, "look for shipping color standards. 1960 to 1963. Merton's lining contracts." Russell's head lifted. "Do not use that name like you have evidence." Caleb did not look up. "I'm looking. You are dragging your job through the mud before you even start." That made Caleb pause. For 1 second, the phone screen reflected in his eyes. Foundation logo, clean serif letters, a photograph of the old mill restored into a heritage center. He had imagined walking through those doors in a pressed shirt, imagined shaking hands with people who did not know him first as Nora Whitcomb's grandson. Then he looked at the loom. "What if the mud was already there?" he said. The question surprised everyone, including him. Nora's face changed, but only slightly. Pride, if that was what it was, passed through her quietly. Caleb found a scanned booklet after several attempts. The file loaded line by line. Merton's Textile Works Internal Shipping and Color Identification. Revised 1961. Most of the pages were too blurry to read on a phone, but one chart appeared clearly enough. Blue, receiving source. Brown, mill batch. Gray, lining grade. Red, priority allocation. Black, diverted or reassigned shipment. May whispered, "Diverted." Caleb enlarged the page until the words blurred, then sharpened again. Russell stepped closer despite himself. That booklet could refer to regular mill inventory, not relief cloth. Nora reached for the inventory card May had found and placed it beside the cloth sample. "Then explain why church storage used the same colors," she said. Russell said nothing. Caleb scrolled further. A second page showed contractor abbreviations. Most were letters and numbers, dull as machinery. But one line made his thumb stop. H3 partials, holding stock pending measurement, not cleared for finished release. He looked at the receipt on the table. HB. The mark was there, faint but undeniable. Caleb looked at his grandmother. "You didn't sign it out as finished cloth." "No. You signed it for measurement." "Yes." Mrs. Pruitt's voice came from the coat shelves, thinner now. "Then why did they say she stole it?" Nora's eyes stayed on the table. "Because I was the last poor girl with a key." No one answered that. It was not a confession. It was not even anger. It was the kind of truth a town could build a whole lie around because it fit too neatly into what people already believed. Nora picked up the small cloth sample she had kept for 60 years. The edge trembled between her fingers. "That night," she said, "Elsie told me to copy the labels before anyone cut the bolts. She thought maybe the wrong cloth had been delivered. She was trying to protect the children's list." "What list?" Caleb asked. "The names." "The 43? Nora nodded. Russell looked away. Nora continued. "Elsie wrote down every child who needed a coat. Not just church families. Not just families people approved of. Mill families. Colored families from the lower road. 2 children whose father was in jail. 3 whose mother worked laundry for Merton's supervisors. She knew if the list became public too soon, someone would decide some children were less deserving than others." May closed her eyes. The basement seemed to lower around them. Nora placed the sample down. "When I entered the storage room, 3 bolts were already missing. The receipt was waiting where I would find it. My name was already on a line I had not signed." Russell seized on that. "But you did sign something." "Yes. Earlier. For measurement. And someone used that." "Yes." Caleb stood slowly. "So the receipt wasn't forged from nothing. They used a real signature." "That is why it worked," Nora said. This was the midpoint no one had prepared for. Nora had not been cleared by a dramatic confession or a hidden note with a villain's name. The truth was worse because it was built from pieces of reality. A real key, a real signature, a real cloth sample under her coat. Enough truth to make a lie survive 60 years. Caleb returned to the beam. "The black thread starts after the same 4-color sequence." Nora nodded. "Because the shipment changed status. From relief to reassigned." Russell's jaw tightened. "That is speculation." Caleb held up the phone. "It's in their own manual. A manual proves process. Not theft. No, Nora said. The loom proved sequence. She pointed to the thread under the maple repair. Blue, brown, gray, red. Relief priority. Then black. Diverted. Then the second pattern repeats with contractor spacing. Caleb frowned. Contractor spacing? At the mill, a space was not empty, Nora said. A missing loop meant a destination code. We used it when tags tore off or when cloth moved between floors. May looked at the tiny holes in the wood. Someone drilled those. Elsie's brother, Nora said. After the scandal, he repaired the loom in spring. I thought he was only fixing the beam. I did not know then what she had asked him to hide. Caleb looked up. Elsie helped make this? Nora's voice softened. Elsie was braver in pieces than she could be all at once. Russell made a sound under his breath. Convenient. A dead teacher, a dead repairman, a dead mill owner. Everyone dead except the person making accusations. Nora turned to him. Your father is dead too, Russell. Yet you quoted him this morning as if death made him honest. The words struck hard. Russell's face went pale, then red. My father served this church for 40 years. I know. He kept this place open. I know that too. Something flickered in his eyes. The first sign that he had begun to understand the danger was not only to Mertens, it might be nearer. Under his own family name. Under the roof he was trying to save again. Caleb went back to the phone. He searched the contractor abbreviations on the Mertens chart. The page took too long to load. The spinning circle turned and turned. Then the basement door opened. A woman in a dark raincoat stepped in, closing an umbrella with careful calm. She was in her 30s, polished, composed, and dry in the way only people with good cars and covered parking seemed to stay dry. Caleb recognized her immediately from the foundation website. Lydia Vos. She looked first at Caleb, then at Russell, then at Nora's hand on the loom. I came as soon as my assistant called, she said. No one spoke. Lydia's eyes moved to the receipt, the inventory card, the cloth sample, and finally the exposed thread in the beam. Her expression did not change enough for most people to notice. But Nora noticed. So did Caleb. Because Lydia Voss did not look confused. She looked late. Russell cleared his throat. Miss Voss, this situation has gotten emotional. Lydia gave a small, professional smile. Old stories often do. Nora's fingers pressed against the loom. Caleb held up his phone with the Mertens manual still open. Is this real? Lydia glanced at the screen. Yes, she said. The answer was so clean that it frightened him. And black means diverted shipment? Her smile faded slightly. In certain contexts, she said. Nora looked at the exposed thread. This is one of them. Lydia did not answer. She did not have to. For the first time in 60 years, someone from Mertens Textile had stood in front of Nora Whitcomb and failed to call her a liar. That was not the full truth. Not yet, but it was enough to make the basement understand that the missing coats had not disappeared because of one poor seamstress with a key. They had moved through a system, and that system had left color behind. Lydia Voss did not step fully into the basement at first. She stood near the bottom of the stairs with her folded umbrella in one hand and her leather folder in the other, studying the room the way an appraiser studies damage before naming a price. Her eyes moved from the exposed thread to the receipt, from the receipt to Nora, and from Nora to Caleb. That last look lasted longest. Caleb, she said gently, I'm sorry this is happening in public. Caleb swallowed. I didn't ask you to come. No. My assistant understood there was concern involving foundation records and your pending employment. The word pending changed the air around him. Nora heard it. So did Russell. Lydia placed her folder on the nearest table without opening it. Before this goes any further, I think everyone should understand that Mertens Textile Foundation takes historical claims very seriously, but incomplete claims, made without proper archival review, can damage living people, active programs, and institutions that serve this community. Russell seized the sentence like a rope. Exactly. That is what I have been trying to say. Nora looked at him. No, Russell, you have been trying to say thief. His face tightened. Lydia's expression remained smooth. Mrs. Whitcomb, no one here wants to hurt you. Maybelle made a small sound that almost became a laugh. Lydia ignored it. But old objects can be misunderstood. Old markings can be misread. And old pain can make patterns seem clearer than they are. Nora rested one hand on the loom. I worked those patterns before your foundation learned to polish them. For the first time, Lydia's smile thinned. Caleb looked down at his phone, where the Mertens manual still glowed. The more he looked at it, the less it felt like a door opening, and the more it felt like a trap with his own name attached. Lydia finally opened the folder. Inside was a printed offer letter. Not Caleb's. Another document. The foundation would be willing to purchase the loom from First Mercy Church as a historical textile artifact, she said. We can arrange professional removal today, safe conservation, and private review by qualified staff. Russell's eyes flicked toward the leaking ceiling. How much? He asked before he could stop himself. Lydia slid the paper toward him. He looked at the number. The basement went silent around his silence. It was enough. Nora knew it before anyone spoke. Enough to repair the roof. Enough to keep the pantry open. Enough to make the committee forget why the offer had arrived so quickly. Russell folded the page halfway, as if hiding the amount made the temptation smaller. This is generous, he said. It is responsible, Lydia replied. The foundation preserves history. Nora looked at the exposed thread. Not all of it. Caleb stepped closer to the table. Does my job depend on this? Lydia turned to him with practiced concern. Your offer depends on trust, judgment, and professionalism. That sounds like yes. It sounds like you are being asked not to participate in reckless accusations. Caleb's face flushed. I asked a question about a manual, and you involved a foundation name in a room full of people before any expert could authenticate what you found. Nora saw his shoulders drop. There it was. Not a threat sharp enough to call a threat. Something softer, more useful. A hand on the future. Russell cleared his throat. If the foundation takes the loom, they can examine it properly. And if they take it, May said, will we ever see what is inside again? Lydia looked at her. If relevant findings emerge, appropriate parties will be notified. Appropriate, May repeated. Nora picked up the screwdriver. Lydia's voice sharpened only slightly. Mrs. Whitcomb, I would advise you not to continue dismantling an item now under purchase discussion. It is not under discussion with me. It belongs to the church. Nora looked at Russell. Does it? Russell hesitated. That hesitation mattered. The loom had been in the basement longer than most committee members had been alive. People had called it church property because it was easier than asking who gave it, who repaired it, and why Elsie Marrow had insisted it stay where women could work on it after hours. Lydia turned to Russell. Deacon Haid, if the church is willing, my office can have a formal agreement drafted before close of business. We can also include support for the winter clothing program. Mrs. Pruitt looked up at that. Her brother's old spring jacket had lived in her memory for 60 years. Now the foundation was offering new coats with clean money and clean paper. It was cruel how mercy could be used as a lid. Caleb looked at Nora. Grandma, she heard the plea underneath his voice. Please don't make me choose. Please don't make this cost everything. Please don't make the name Whitcomb heavy again. Nora softened. I know, she said. No, he answered, and now there was anger in it. You don't. You had 60 years to live with this. I just got pulled into it this morning. That struck her hard enough to make her hands still. Caleb continued, quieter. I need that job. We need it. Your medicine isn't getting cheaper. Rent isn't getting easier. And now the one place willing to hire me is standing right here telling me to stop. Nora did not defend herself, because he was not wrong. That was the knife. Truth did not arrive with clean hands. It came carrying bills, medicine bottles, roof leaks, and young men who had not asked to inherit old accusations. Lydia watched the exchange and knew better than to interrupt too soon. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. There are ways to honor your grandmother without putting your family at risk. Nora looked at her. You sound like Elsie did when she was afraid. The name changed Lydia's posture. Only a fraction, but Caleb saw it. You know Elsie Marrow? He asked. Lydia closed the folder. The foundation has many records. That's not what I asked. Russell shifted. Caleb, enough. But Caleb's attention had sharpened. Grandma said Elsie told her to wait until the children's names were safe. What does that mean? Lydia did not answer. Nora reached into her sewing bag and took out the wax paper that had wrapped her cloth sample. Inside one fold, hidden so neatly Caleb had missed it, was a second piece of paper. Smaller, older, torn at the bottom. She did not open it all the way. only enough for him to see the first line. Nora, not yet. Not until the children have names, no one can erase. Caleb stopped breathing for a moment. Russell stared at the note as if it had turned the floor beneath him thin. Lydia's eyes went to the paper, then to the loom. Now she looked worried. Not late. Worried. Nora folded the note again. Elsie sent that after the hearing. Russell's voice came out rough. What hearing? Nora looked at him, and for the first time that morning, there was pity in her eyes. The one your father said was only a church matter. Russell stepped back as if she had touched him. Lydia picked up her folder. I strongly recommend that no one continue without counsel present. Nora nodded. Then call counsel. The room froze. Nora turned to Caleb and held out the screwdriver. This time, she was not asking him to save the loom. She was asking him to choose what kind of man the town would make of him. Caleb looked at Lydia, then at Russell, then at the note in Nora's hand. Finally, he took the screwdriver. Lydia said his name once. He ignored her. Under Nora's guidance, he set the tip beneath the next sealed patch and began to lift. Caleb lifted the sealed patch slowly. The wood resisted at first, not because it was strong, but because it had been waiting so long that dust, wax, and time had made a second skin over it. Nora kept one hand near his wrist, not touching, only guiding. May held the flashlight steady. Russell stood behind them with his arms at his sides now. No clipboard, no watch, no practiced authority left to hide behind. Lydia Voss had stopped smiling altogether. The patch came free with a soft crack. Behind it was not a stack of letters. Not money. Not a neat confession wrapped in ribbon. There was only a narrow hollow inside the upper beam, and inside that hollow lay a folded strip of cloth wound around an old wooden shuttle. Nora made a sound so small, Caleb almost missed it. The shuttle was dark with age, worn smooth where fingers had once pushed it through thread. Around it, the cloth strip had been folded and refolded until its edges were soft. Tiny loops of colored thread ran along one side. Blue, brown, gray, red, black, then a gap, then gray, black, brown, then 3 red loops knotted close together. Caleb looked at it and saw nothing but thread. Nora looked at it and saw a ledger. May whispered, "Can you read it?" Nora nodded, but her hand did not move. For 60 years, she had waited for this. Yet now that the cloth was in front of her, she looked almost afraid of what it might ask from the living. Caleb understood then that truth was not always a rescue. Sometimes it was a door that opened onto every person who had chosen not to knock. He placed the shuttle in her palm. Nora unfolded the cloth strip on the table beside the receipt and inventory card. The basement gathered around it. The first line repeats the relief shipment, she said. Receiving source. Merton's batch. Lining grade. Priority allocation. She touched the black thread. Diverted. Her finger moved to the gap. Removed from relief inventory before cutting. Lydia said quietly, "That interpretation would need verification." Nora did not look at her. "Then verify it." She continued, "Gray, black, brown. Lining reassigned to outside coat contract. 3 red knots mean winter allocation converted." Russell's voice came rough. "Converted to what?" Nora looked at him. "Surplus." The word seemed too small for what it carried. Surplus meant extra. Surplus meant unnecessary. Surplus meant no child was waiting for it. With one word, cloth meant for children who had no coats became material available for sale. May put a hand over her mouth. Caleb leaned closer. "Who bought it?" Nora turned the strip slightly. Along the bottom edge, where the cloth had darkened with age, were initials stitched so small they looked like mistakes. A.M. Then beside it, another mark. Erha. Russell saw the second mark before Nora explained it. "No," he said. No one answered. "No," he said again, but softer, as if the word had lost its shape. Nora's eyes lifted to his. Arthur Mertens signed the conversion. Richard Haid witnessed the loss report. Russell stepped back until his shoulder touched the stacked chairs. "My father would not have." "He did," Nora said. "Maybe he told himself it saved the church. Maybe he told himself the coats would be replaced. Maybe he told himself poor children were always cold anyway, and one winter would not matter." Russell's face twisted. "Don't." Nora's voice broke for the first time. "I have been told not to speak for 60 years. The basement went still. Caleb looked at the initials again. "What loss report?" May moved before Russell could answer. She crossed to the filing cabinet, pulled the 1962 folder, and searched with hands that had begun to shake. Several papers slid loose. Furnace repair, food pantry receipts, a board agenda. Then she found one folded sheet with water stains along the top. First Mercy Church relief cloth loss statement. Russell took one step forward, then stopped. May read silently first. Her eyes filled. Then she handed it to Caleb. He read aloud because Nora could not. Due to volunteer mishandling and undocumented removal of partial bolts, First Mercy Church reports loss of allocated relief cloth before garment completion. His voice slowed. Signed, Richard Hayde, Treasurer. Below it was a second note clipped to the statement. Emergency roof donation received Merton's Community Fund. The 22nd of December 1962. The buckets upstairs dripped again. Hollow, hollow, hollow. Russell sat down hard on one of the folding chairs. For a long moment, he looked older than Nora. My father fixed the roof that winter, he said. Nora nodded. He said it was a blessing. It was payment. The word did not accuse him. That made it worse. Lydia closed her folder. These documents require proper chain of custody. None of this should be discussed further without legal review. Caleb turned on her. You knew there was a roof donation. The foundation maintains thousands of historical financial records. You knew enough to come here before the loom was open. She did not answer. That silence said more than the folder ever could. Nora unfolded the last part of the cloth strip. Tucked into the shuttle groove was another paper, thinner than the receipt, folded into a square. Elsie's handwriting was cramped, as if she had written quickly. Nora did not read it first. She gave it to Caleb. This time his voice shook. Nora, if you are reading this, then the loom stayed where I asked William to hide the strip. I was not brave enough at the hearing. They threatened my position, and worse, they threatened the children's list. I believed them. I am sorry. He stopped and swallowed. Nora looked at the floor. Caleb continued. The cloth was not lost. Arthur Merton sold the lining allocation to Caro Industrial Outfitters for winter work coats. Richard Hayde signed the church loss statement after the roof money came through. They needed one name to hold the blame. They chose yours because you had a key and no protection. Mrs. Pruitt began to cry without making a sound. Caleb read the final lines. The names are in my school ledger. 43 children. If the ledger survives, give the truth to them first. Not to the church. Not to Mertens. To them. No one moved. Because the truth had finally stepped out of the loom, and it was not only Nora's truth. It belonged to children who had walked to school cold while men wrote clean reports. It belonged to families who had blamed a young seamstress because blaming a mill owner was too expensive. It belonged to a church that had repaired its roof with money that should have become sleeves, buttons, and lining. And it belonged to Russell too, though he did not want it. He stared at his father's signature until his lips trembled. My father let them call you a thief. Nora looked at him. Yes. Russell covered his mouth with one hand. He let me repeat it. Nora's face softened, but she did not comfort him. Some grief had to do its own work. Lydia reached for the offer letter on the table. May put her palm over it before she could take it back. No, May said. Lydia looked at her. Excuse me? May's voice shook, but she held firm. You wanted to buy that loom before we saw what was inside. That paper stays too. Caleb took out his phone and began photographing everything. The receipt, the inventory card, the loss statement, the roof donation note, Elsie's letter, the coded cloth strip. Lydia said, Caleb, I would think carefully. He did not stop. Nora watched him, and the old pain in her chest shifted. It did not disappear. Nothing that old disappeared in one morning. But for the first time, it was not only hers to carry. Russell stood slowly. Mrs. Whitcomb, he said. The room waited for apology. Nora did not. Not yet, she said. He blinked. She touched Elsie's letter. First we find the ledger. They found Elsie Merrow's school ledger in a place no one had thought to look because no one had cared where a teacher's records went after she died. Not the archive. Not the foundation. Not the locked church cabinet. May Bell remembered a narrow metal trunk in the old Sunday school closet, behind the Christmas pageant robes and a cardboard manger missing one leg. Elsie had taught reading classes there after retirement, and when she passed, the church had boxed her materials without sorting them. Russell brought the trunk out himself. No one asked him to. He simply walked to the closet, moved the robes aside, and carried the trunk back with both hands. His face had gone pale and fixed, as if the signatures on those papers had reached across 60 years and taken hold of him by the collar. The lock was rusted. Caleb opened it with a screwdriver. Inside were attendance sheets, lesson cards, handwriting drills, and a brown ledger wrapped in newspaper. Across the cover, in Elsie's neat hand, were 5 words: Children needing winter coats, 1,962. Nora did not touch it. She stepped back. Caleb noticed. "Grandma? Read them," she said. "Not for me." So he did. One B1. Tommy Pruitt, age 7. Blue wool preferred, if available. Clara Hensley, age 9. Coat too small since last winter. Samuel Reed, age 6. Walks Lower Road. Needs lining. The Jackson twins, age 8. One coat shared between 2 children. Martha Bell, age 10. Sleeves torn through. May made a sound at the last name. "My aunt," she whispered. Mrs. Pruitt sat down before her knees gave way. By the time Caleb reached the 20th name, no one in the basement was standing the way they had stood before. The list had changed the room. It had taken the scandal out of rumor and put it back into bodies. Children with sizes. Children with routes to school. Children whose mothers had asked quietly because asking loudly cost too much. Russell lowered himself onto a chair across from Nora. "I repeated it," he said. Nora looked at him. "I repeated what my father said. At board meetings, in sermons about stewardship, when people asked why you still came down here." His voice cracked. "I thought I was defending the church." Nora did not answer quickly. For 60 years, people had imagined her waiting for an apology, but apology, when it finally arrived, did not feel like payment. It felt like someone returning a bucket after the house had already burned. "Then defend it now," she said. Russell lifted his eyes. "Open the records." Lydia Voss stepped forward. "Before anyone releases names or documents, there are privacy, legal, and institutional concerns." May turned on her. "Those children would be in their 70s now, if they're alive. Their families have a right to know." "The Foundation is not refusing review," Lydia said, "but this must be handled responsibly." Caleb looked at her. "Responsible like buying the loom before anyone could finish opening it?" Lydia's face hardened. "Caleb, I understand emotions are high." "No," he said. "You understand leverage." The basement went quiet. His phone was still in his hand. The job offer email sat somewhere inside it, glowing like a door he might never walk through. "I withdraw my application," Caleb said. Nora turned toward him sharply. "Caleb?" He shook his head. "No, I don't know what comes next. But I know I can't start a job by helping bury what my grandmother waited 60 years to prove." Lydia said nothing. That silence was colder than refusal. Russell stood. His hands shook as he gathered the loss statement, the roof donation note, and the old church board folder. "I will call an emergency meeting," he said, "today." Lydia looked at him. "Deacon Haid, I strongly recommend counsel first. I heard you the first time, and—" Russell looked at his father's signature. "And I have spent my life letting a dead man's version of decency speak through me." He swallowed. "It is time I find out what decency costs when it is alive." It was not a grand speech. His voice nearly failed twice. But no one in the basement mistook it for performance. By late afternoon, the buyer's representative arrived to find no cleared basement, no ready sale, and no one willing to pretend the loom was trash. The removal crew waited outside for 12 minutes, then left when May stood in the doorway and told them the item was evidence. At 5 o'clock, the loom was still there. So was Nora. By 7, descendants of the names in Elsie's ledger began arriving. May called 3. Mrs. Pruitt called 2. Caleb scanned the ledger, the receipt, Elsie's letter, and the coated cloth strip while Russell signed a temporary release, allowing church records from December 1962 to be reviewed by families first. Not reporters, not donors, not merchants. Families. One woman arrived with a photograph of her father at age 7, wearing a coat 3 sizes too small. Another man stood over the ledger and touched his mother's name without speaking. A retired nurse recognized 2 siblings who had missed school that winter because they had no warm clothes. Every name pulled the past out of abstraction and placed it at the table. Nora stayed near the loom, not because she wanted worship, but because her legs were tired. Mrs. Pruitt came to her last. Her eyes were red. Her mouth was tight. For a moment, it seemed she might say the apology everyone expected. Instead, she said. Tommy never liked being cold after that. Even as an old man, kept 3 coats in his truck. Nora nodded. I'm sorry he needed one. Mrs. Pruitt's face broke. I'm sorry we blamed you for it. Nora closed her eyes once. That was enough. Later, Russell returned with a handwritten statement for the church door. He did not make Nora approve it. He read it aloud anyway. First Mercy Church had discovered credible evidence that the 1,962 relief cloth loss had been falsely attributed to Nora Whitcomb. Church records would be opened to affected families. The proposed basement sale was suspended. Any future use of the space would be decided only after the families in Elsie Marrow's ledger had been contacted. When he finished, he looked at Nora. I cannot undo what my father signed. No, Nora said. I cannot undo what I said this morning. No. His eyes filled. What can I do? Nora looked at the shelves of donated coats. Start there, she said. So he did. Russell Haight, who had called her thief before breakfast, spent that night sorting winter coats by size under Maybelle's direction. Caleb scanned records until his phone battery died, then borrowed May's charger and kept going. Mrs. Pruitt wrote names on envelopes. Families sat at folding tables with coffee gone cold, reading proof that grief they had inherited was not imagination. Lydia Voss left before the rain stopped. But she left without the loom. And for Nora, that was not victory. Victory would have been 43 children warm in 1962. What remained was responsibility. She ran her fingers over the cracked beam and looked at Caleb, who was photographing Elsie's ledger page by page. The truth does not belong to whoever finds it, she said. He looked up. It belongs to whoever paid for its absence. By spring, the basement of First Mercy Church no longer looked like a room waiting to be sold. The red removal sticker was gone from the loom. So was the faded quilt Nora had used to cover it for years. The folding chairs had been moved into 2 clean rows. The old hymnals were boxed and labeled. The shelves that once held donated winter coats now held fabric, needles, thread, buttons, measuring tape, and brown paper patterns. The roof had been repaired, but not with money from Mertens. After the church records were opened, families from Elsie Marrow's ledger sent what they could. Some gave $20. Some gave old photographs. Some gave stories. One woman sent a note saying her father had never stopped hating December. Another sent a child's coat from the 1970s, carefully folded, with a card that read, "For the children who should have had one first." Russell Haight kept the note in the church file. He did not become a hero. No one asked him to. He came early on Saturdays, unlocked the basement, made coffee, carried boxes, and opened whatever old church records families requested. Sometimes people thanked him. Sometimes they did not. He accepted both. Caleb did not go to work for the Mertens Textile Foundation. For a while, that frightened him more than he admitted. Rent was still rent. Medicine still had prices. A good job did not appear just because a person chose the truth, but the county library hired him part-time to help scan community records. Then, a legal aid office asked if he could assist with organizing witness files from the 1,962 relief cloth case. He learned quickly, not because he had planned to become useful to history, but because history had finally become personal. The loom itself was not restored whole. That had surprised some people. A reporter from Harrisburg asked Nora if she wanted it preserved in a museum. A local historical committee offered a glass case. Lydia Voss, through an attorney, offered access to Mertens conservation experts if the foundation could be included in the official interpretation. Nora said no to all of them. The loom already did its work, she said. So the broken frame was taken apart properly. The coated cloth strip went into a public legal archive with copies for every family named in Elsie's ledger. The old shuttle, the one that had carried Elsie's letter, was given to Elsie Marrow's niece, who held it against her chest and cried without making a sound. The damaged maple repair strip became part of a teaching board mounted on the basement wall, not behind glass, but low enough for children to touch. The rest of the usable wood became a small practice loom. Maybelle called it ugly. Nora called it honest. On the first Saturday of April, 8 people came to the basement sewing class. By June, there were 23. Children came because their grandparents made them. Then they stayed because Nora taught without rushing. She showed them how to thread a needle, how to patch a torn sleeve from the inside, how to match lining to wool, how to pull thread with enough tension to hold but not enough to break. Caleb sat in the back during the first class, pretending to organize scans. Nora noticed. She always noticed thread trying to hide in the wrong place. "Come here," she said. He looked up. "I'm working. You are avoiding." May laughed from the coat table. Caleb came forward, embarrassed in a gentler way than he had been that rainy morning. Nora placed a needle in his hand and showed him how to knot thread with his thumb. His first stitch was crooked. "So was the truth," Nora said. He looked at her, then smiled. "Not much. Enough." The church did not put Nora's name on a plaque right away. She did not ask for one. What mattered more was the ledger. Every family named by Elsie had received a copy. Some wanted public acknowledgement, some wanted privacy, some wanted legal action, some only wanted to know why their parents had carried cold like a family trait. The case stayed open. Merton's Textile Foundation released a statement that said the records were deeply concerning. Nora did not read it twice. She had learned long ago that institutions could spend many words avoiding one plain sentence. Russell read it and wept in his office. Then he opened another box of records. One afternoon, a little girl named Anna Pruitt came to class wearing a yellow raincoat and serious eyes. She was Tommy Pruitt's great-granddaughter. She watched Nora demonstrate a simple woven pattern, then raised her hand. "Mrs. Whitcomb," she asked, "why didn't you leave Mill Hollow if everybody was mean to you?" The room went quiet. Caleb looked up from the scanner. Russell stopped sorting forms. May stopped cutting thread. Nora rested both hands on the small practice loom. For a moment, she saw the old basement as it had been in 1962. Elsie, with her silver-rimmed glasses, bolts of wool on the table, children's names in a brown ledger, and a young woman who did not yet know how long silence could last. Then the vision passed. "Because leaving does not always put a thing down," Nora said. "Sometimes you carry it farther." Anna thought about that. Nora touched the first row of stitches on the practice loom. "And because some threads wait a long time for the right hands." The little girl nodded as if that made perfect sense. Then Nora guided her fingers over the thread. Blue, brown, gray, red. Not as evidence this time, as memory. Outside, the rain began again, soft against the basement windows. But the roof no longer leaked. No buckets waited upstairs. No hollow sound counted down from above. In the basement, a child pulled thread through wood, and an old woman watched carefully. The loom had been called junk once. Nora never corrected them. She simply kept it long enough for the truth to learn how to speak.